reading from the Gospel of Mark, the 6th chapter, beginning with the 30th verse. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day. So his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go out and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5, and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Around this time every year, my family takes inventory. And it's part of how we plan our budget for the coming year, but it's also, where are we? What do we have? And this is a habit I got into after working at Walmart for 8 years. Because every January, I don't know why they chose January, but our stores always seem to choose January, was inventory time. And inventory in a major retailer means everything in the store gets counted. So, how do we take inventory as a church? Well, when you take inventory, just like in the store, you count what you have. This is the first place where we make a mistake when we take inventory as a church. Because most congregations, in fact, I would say every congregation I've served, when they begin to take inventory, they don't start by counting what they have. They start by counting what they don't have. We don't have a band. We don't have a projector to put the words of the songs on the wall. All of the things that big church down the road has, we don't have. We don't have a singles ministry. We don't have a young adults ministry. We don't have an empty nesters ministry. When I worked at Walmart, we took inventory. We didn't count what we didn't have. Now, we compared what we had to what we thought we had, what we were supposed to have, but we didn't actually count. We don't have these, Because how do you count nothing? But we do that as a church, and it's not just this church. It's so tempting to look at another church that has lots of people going and covet what they have. And then kind of say, well, that's why they're successful and we're not. They have these things and we don't. But that's not how you do inventory. You count the things you have. So, let's count what we have. Well, usually this starts with looking at our church bank accounts. That's where we always seem to start when we take inventory is how much money do we have in the bank? How long can we pay the bills and keep the doors open? That can be an important thing to know. In fact, I was at one church serving as a pastor where they were upset because this was the 90s, and back in the 70s, they had 3 times as many members. And they'd gone from an average attendance of close to 100 to an average attendance of just over 30 in 20 years. And I'd been there less than 6 months as a pastor, and they decided we need to have a meeting to determine if we can keep the church doors open or not. Now, this is my first pastorate. And I'm thinking, I haven't even been here 6 months and they're talking about closing the place. It was not much of a confidence booster at that point. But in the meeting, the treasurer stood up. And he said, I don't just look at our current books, but I've looked back over our past books. And he said, back in the 70s, when we had over 100 people attending the church, the average amount of money we had in our checking account at the end of each month was $500. He said, since I've been serving as treasurer, we have never had less than $5,000 at the end of the month in our checking account. And that doesn't include the money that we have in savings bonds and other accounts that we can't access it all the time. So that was a very fruitful point, looking at the finances of the church. That we may not have the people, but we have some resources. And then the next thing we look at besides money is people. Sometimes this is the first thing we look at, because we look out and we count faces, and we see empty spaces, and the empty spaces outnumber the faces. Now, this is a vision my mom had when she was pastoring. I wish I had had it, but it was hers. And she had a tradition where every New Year's Day, she went over to the church, and she spent New Year's Day in a personal retreat of Bible study and prayer in a sanctuary. And she was sitting up front, and she closed her eyes and she saw everyone in the church. And she saw where they sat. And so-and-so was over here, because they always sat over here. Everybody had their place. And she saw all of the empty spots in the church. And she was counting the people, and she was getting depressed at the number of people. And then she looked up, and the church was full. Now, all the people that were there, and in every empty seat in the church, Jesus was sitting. The disciples, when they took inventory, they counted the bread and the fish. When we take inventory, we count the money and we count the people. The disciples forgot what we often forget. They had one more thing to count in their inventory. They had Jesus. We have Jesus. And if we do inventory and we forget that we have Jesus, we're missing the most important thing. Because if we don't have Jesus, we're not a church. And it doesn't matter how many people show up here on Sunday morning and how much money we have in the bank. And it doesn't matter what ministries we do. It doesn't matter whether we have a band or a choir or children's ministries or singles ministries. None of that matters if we don't have Jesus. Everything else we have or don't have is temporary. And it can change at a minute's notice. I've seen it. I was serving at one church, and one of the members came to the business meeting and said, here's this ministry I want us to do. And we all got excited about it. Until our treasurer said we don't have the money to do that. But we didn't let that stop us from getting excited about it. 2 months later, a member of the church who had not darkened the doorway of the church in 40 years passed away, and the church got a call from their lawyer and a check for $20,000. You know what? That was a miracle. Now, I don't know what they would have done with that money if we hadn't had that vision already. But we already had this mission we were excited about, and we were just, oh, if only we had the money to do this. We didn't let that lack of resources stop us from dreaming. Ask yourselves for this church, not what can we do? Ask yourselves, what do we want to do? If resources were not an issue, if we had all the training, all the expertise, all the people, all the money to do something, what would it be? Don't limit your dreams for this church on what we currently have. Because I found that when the church has the dream, God provides the resources. When the church recognizes the need, back in the scripture I read, Jesus didn't say, hey, it's time to eat, go feed the people. The disciples recognized the need. These people need to eat. But we don't have the resources. We know the needs of our community. Let us not limit our vision for this church on our current resources. Or if we do, let's make sure we include Jesus as one of our current resources. Dream big. Plan big. God will provide what we need to do His work. number 660.